Some people believe the loudest person in a courtroom holds the most power. They never imagine that true strength is often the one standing in silence. The sharp crack of flesh against flesh echoed across the courtroom before anyone had time to blink. Every conversation stopped. Every pen froze above a legal pad. Even the judge's hand paused halfway to the wooden gavel. Officer Daniel Brooks, a broad-shouldered white police officer with nearly 2 decades on the force, stood over a black woman wearing a neatly pressed navy blazer. His palm was still suspended in the air, fingers slightly trembling from the force of the slap he had just delivered. The entire courtroom stared in disbelief. The woman did not stumble. She did not scream. She did not cover her face. Instead, she slowly turned her head back toward him, her dark eyes steady, unreadable, almost impossibly calm. For one long heartbeat, no one moved. Imagine standing there, surrounded by dozens of strangers, feeling every pair of eyes fixed on you after being humiliated in the very place where justice is supposed to live. Imagine hearing your own heartbeat while the room waits to see whether you will break or become something no one expected. Officer Brooks let out a short, mocking laugh. "I told you to sit down," he barked loudly enough for everyone to hear. People like you never seem to understand simple instructions. Several spectators shifted uneasily in their seats. Others lowered their eyes, pretending they hadn't heard the words. No one wanted to become part of whatever was unfolding. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, filling the heavy silence with an almost mechanical hum. Outside the tall courtroom windows, gray clouds gathered over the city, dimming the afternoon light until everything inside felt colder than before. The woman remained motionless. Her breathing was slow, controlled, measured. There was no anger on her face, only discipline, that frightened one elderly attorney more than any shout ever could. He had spent 40 years inside courtrooms. He knew exactly what uncontrolled rage looked like. This wasn't it. This looked like someone making a decision. Brooks mistook her silence for fear. He stepped closer. His polished boots struck the marble floor with deliberate confidence. "You think glaring at me changes anything?" he sneered. "You're lucky, I'm only warning you." A nervous cough escaped from somewhere behind the gallery. The court reporter stopped typing. Even the bailiff looked uncertain. Something felt terribly wrong. Not because a confrontation had happened. Courtrooms saw arguments every day. Not because someone had been slapped. Sadly, that wasn't unheard of either. It was the woman's eyes. There was something unsettling about them. Not hatred. Not panic. Recognition. As though she had already calculated exactly what would happen next. No one in that courtroom knew who she really was. To them, she looked like another witness. Another black woman caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Another face that could be dismissed. Another voice that could be silenced. Officer Brooks believed exactly that. Years of wearing a badge had convinced him that authority belonged to whoever carried the loudest command. He had never learned the difference between power and respect. The judge finally rose from his chair. "Officer Brooks," he called, his voice firm but uncertain. "Stand down." Brooks barely acknowledged him. His attention remained locked on the woman. "So," he said with a crooked smile, "are you finally going to cooperate?" She lifted her chin only slightly. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that everyone leaned forward to hear. "I already was." The answer confused him. His smile disappeared. "What did you say?" She repeated the same 4 words. "I already was." Then everything happened faster than anyone could process. Brooks reached forward. Whether he intended to grab her shoulder or shove her backward, no one would later agree. Security cameras would replay the next second hundreds of times. Legal experts would analyze it frame by frame. Military instructors would use it in seminars about defensive reaction. But inside that courtroom, nobody had time to think. The woman moved. Not with anger. Not with revenge. With instinct. Years of disciplined training compressed into a single, perfectly controlled motion. One step. One pivot. One punch. The sound was unlike the slap that had started everything. It was deeper. Cleaner. Officer Daniel Brooks' eyes widened with complete disbelief as his body left its balance. Then, in absolute silence, the man who believed he controlled the courtroom collapsed onto the polished marble floor. The impact sent Officer Daniel Brooks crashing backward onto the polished marble floor with a force that seemed to shake the entire courtroom. His badge struck the ground first, spinning away in a metallic circle before sliding beneath the jury box. The room fell into a silence so complete that even the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead sounded deafening. No one breathed. No one spoke. For several endless seconds, every person inside that courtroom simply stared. Brooks lay motionless, one hand pressed against his jaw, his eyes wide with confusion more than pain. He had expected fear. He had expected tears, perhaps even an apology. He had never expected resistance. Across the room, Captain Maya Carter remained exactly where she had finished her movement. Her feet were planted firmly. Her shoulders relaxed. Her fists were already open again. It was as though the punch had never happened. Imagine witnessing a moment so unexpected that your mind refuses to accept what your eyes have just seen. The woman everyone believed would become another victim was standing calmly, while the man who thought he controlled the room struggled to understand how he had ended up on the floor. The courtroom doors burst open. Two deputy marshals rushed inside, instinctively reaching for their weapons before stopping midway. There was no active fight, no chaos, only stunned silence. "Nobody move," one marshal shouted. But nobody needed the order. The spectators remained frozen in their seats. A young law student quietly lowered her notebook. An elderly veteran sitting in the back slowly removed his glasses, blinking several times as though trying to convince himself he had imagined everything. Even Judge Harold Whitmore seemed unable to process what had unfolded. His gavel remained suspended above the bench. "Medical assistance," he finally managed to say, his voice unsteady. "Call medical assistance immediately." Several officers hurried toward Brooks, helping him sit upright. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. His expression had changed completely. The arrogance that had filled his face only moments earlier had vanished, replaced by disbelief. He looked at Maya as if seeing her for the very first time. "You?" he muttered, struggling to catch his breath. What are you?" Maya didn't answer. She simply stood with both hands visible at her sides, making no aggressive movement whatsoever. Years of military discipline had already taken over. She understood something the others did not. The confrontation was over. Any unnecessary action now would only make things worse. One deputy marshal cautiously approached her. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "please remain where you are." "I wasn't planning to move," Maya replied calmly. Her voice carried no anger, no triumph, only composure. Meanwhile, murmurs began spreading through the gallery. "Did you see that? One punch." He slapped her first. "I think every camera recorded it." Phones remained tucked away under strict courtroom rules, but dozens of security cameras fixed high along the walls had captured every second from multiple angles. Nothing would depend on conflicting testimony. The truth already existed, hidden inside digital recordings that could neither panic nor lie. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the gray afternoon sky. Inside, another storm had only just begun. Because although everyone believed they had witnessed the end of the confrontation, they had actually witnessed its beginning. No one in that courtroom, not the judge, not the deputies, not even Officer Brooks himself, had any idea who Captain Maya Carter really was, why she had come to court that morning, or how a single act of violence against the wrong person was about to expose far more than one officer's abuse of power. 6 hours earlier, nothing about Captain Maya Carter suggested that she would become the center of the most talked-about courtroom incident in the state. The morning had begun long before sunrise. A thin layer of mist drifted across the quiet streets as Maya parked her aging pickup truck outside a modest brick townhouse on the outskirts of Richmond. She stepped out wearing a simple charcoal gray blazer over a white blouse, carrying a leather portfolio that had seen years of military service. There were no medals on display, no ribbons, no military insignia. If anyone had passed her on the sidewalk, they would have seen nothing more than another professional heading to court. That was exactly how Maya preferred it. For nearly 16 years, the United States Marine Corps had taught her one lesson above all others. The strongest person in the room rarely needed everyone to know who they were. Imagine spending your life proving your worth through discipline instead of words. Imagine waking before dawn for years, enduring endless training, impossible standards, and dangerous deployments, only to return home knowing that strangers would judge you before hearing your name. Maya had grown accustomed to that reality. She had served in humanitarian missions after devastating hurricanes. She had escorted civilians through active combat zones overseas. She had received commendations for leadership under extraordinary pressure. Yet none of those accomplishments prevented suspicious glances when she entered expensive hotels, airports, or government buildings. She had learned not to react, not because the prejudice didn't hurt, because reacting emotionally often gave people exactly what they expected. Calmness unsettled them far more. As she drove toward the Richmond District Courthouse that morning, the radio quietly reported another public debate over police accountability. Maya switched it off. She had not come to court to make a political statement. She had come because truth required witnesses. Inside her portfolio rested several sealed documents. She never looked at them during the drive. She already knew every page by heart, every signature, every photograph, every timeline. Each document represented months of cooperation with investigators examining allegations of misconduct involving several officers inside the department. Her role was simple: appear, testify honestly, leave. Nothing more. She had promised herself she would remain composed regardless of what happened inside that courtroom. The Marines had prepared her for situations far more dangerous than hostile words. Physical endurance was easy. Emotional restraint required far greater strength. As the courthouse came into view, towering against the gray morning sky, Maya paused before stepping out of her truck. She closed her eyes for only a moment. One slow breath. One quiet reminder. Control your emotions. Control the situation. Those words had echoed through every training exercise she had ever completed. They had become part of who she was. She adjusted her jacket, picked up the leather portfolio, and walked toward the courthouse entrance with measured confidence. People hurried past without recognizing her. Lawyers balanced coffee cups and case files. Deputies exchanged casual conversations near the security checkpoint. Nobody noticed the woman whose calm expression concealed years of combat experience and unwavering discipline. Nobody realized that before the day ended, her name would dominate every news headline in Virginia. And certainly no one, including Officer Daniel Brooks, could have imagined that beneath her quiet smile stood a Marine officer trained to remain peaceful until the exact moment peace was no longer an option. If Captain Maya Carter believed the morning would be difficult, Officer Daniel Brooks intended to make it unbearable. By the time she entered the main courtroom, Brooks had already established himself as the loudest voice in the room. He moved with the confidence of a man who had worn a badge long enough to mistake authority for immunity. His polished uniform was immaculate, every crease perfectly pressed, every button reflecting the cold courtroom lights. To an outsider, he looked like the picture of professionalism. Those who worked with him knew another version. He interrupted people before they finished speaking. He challenged attorneys who questioned him. He treated courtesy as weakness. And whenever someone stood their ground, his temper surfaced almost instantly. Imagine walking into a room where one person has already decided who deserves respect and who doesn't. Before your first word is spoken, a judgment has already been made. Maya quietly approached the witness area, leather portfolio in hand. She nodded politely to the court clerk. "Good morning." The clerk returned the greeting with a nervous smile. Brooks watched the exchange from across the room. His eyes lingered on Maya for several seconds before he walked toward the security checkpoint. "Identification," he said flatly. Without hesitation, Maya handed him her driver's license and the official witness authorization letter issued by the prosecutor's office. Brooks barely glanced at the paperwork. Instead, he looked back at Maya. "You don't look like a government witness." Maya answered calmly. "I was instructed to report by 9 o'clock. I didn't ask what time you were told to report." His tone sharpened. "I asked who you think you are." Several nearby attorneys exchanged uncomfortable glances. The question wasn't about procedure. It was personal. Maya kept her posture relaxed. "My name is Maya Carter." Brooks gave a short laugh. "No, that's your name." He stepped closer. "I asked who you think you are." The hallway outside the courtroom suddenly felt much smaller. Deputies continued walking past, pretending not to notice. No one wanted to interfere with another officer. Maya understood that silence all too well. She had seen it before in different uniforms, different countries, under different circumstances. People often remained quiet not because they agreed with injustice, but because confronting it carried a cost. Brooks slowly circled her. His eyes moved from her shoes to the portfolio in her hands. You lawyers always think paperwork makes you important. I'm not an attorney, Maya replied. Doesn't matter. He shrugged. You people always show up believing the rules somehow protect you. For the first time that morning, a faint crease appeared on Maya's forehead. Not because she felt threatened, because she recognized something familiar. This wasn't an officer enforcing courtroom security. This was a man testing boundaries, looking for a reaction, searching for an excuse to escalate. She had encountered personalities like his before. Military instructors had warned recruits about them. Never let another person's lack of discipline become your own. The prosecutor assigned to the case noticed the growing tension and started walking toward them. Before he could reach the entrance, Brooks extended one arm across the doorway, blocking Maya's path. You're not walking in until I say you are. Maya looked at the courtroom beyond his shoulder. The judge was taking his seat. The hearing was seconds from beginning. She returned her attention to Brooks and spoke in the same calm voice she had maintained all morning. I have every intention of following the court's instructions. Brooks smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone satisfied. It was the smile of someone who believed he had finally found a target that wouldn't fight back. He had no idea that the woman standing before him had spent 16 years mastering exactly that. Most people assume the most dangerous moment in a confrontation is the first insult. They are wrong. The most dangerous moment comes when the person seeking conflict realizes they are no longer getting the reaction they expected. Officer Daniel Brooks had spent nearly 10 minutes trying to provoke Captain Maya Carter. Nothing worked. She never raised her voice. She never argued. She never challenged his authority. Every calm response seemed to irritate him even more. The courtroom slowly filled with attorneys, clerks, deputies, and spectators preparing for the morning hearing. Conversations remained quiet, but curious eyes drifted toward the entrance where Brooks continued blocking Maya's path. Even people who knew nothing about the situation could sense the growing tension. Imagine watching someone remain perfectly composed while another person becomes increasingly angry simply because they cannot control the outcome. Silence has a way of exposing character more clearly than any argument ever could. Judge Harold Whitmore entered through the side door and took his place behind the bench. The court is now in session. His voice echoed across the room. Everyone stood. Everyone except Brooks, who was still focused entirely on Maya. The judge glanced toward the entrance. Officer Brooks. No response. I believe our witness is expected inside. Brooks finally looked toward the bench. I just need another minute, Your Honor. The judge frowned. Bring her in. Instead of stepping aside, Brooks took another half step closer. His voice dropped low enough that only Maya could hear. You've been acting awfully confident. Maya met his gaze. I've been cooperating. His jaw tightened. No. He shook his head slowly. You're making me look foolish. For the first time, Maya recognized what this was truly about. It wasn't courtroom security. It wasn't procedure. It wasn't paperwork. His pride had become involved. Years of military leadership had taught her that wounded pride often created the most dangerous decisions. She answered carefully. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. Brooks laughed without humor. Too late. The prosecutor hurried across the courtroom. Officer Brooks, he said firmly. She is our witness. I know exactly who she is. No, the prosecutor replied. You don't. The sentence hung in the air. Brooks barely acknowledged it. Instead, he reached toward the leather portfolio Maya was carrying. What's in there? Evidence submitted through proper legal channels. I'm asking to see it. You'll see it when the court does. Those words landed harder than she intended. Several spectators noticed Brooks' expression change instantly. His face reddened. His breathing became heavier. The self-control that should have accompanied his badge was slipping away. One elderly woman seated in the gallery quietly whispered to her husband. This isn't going to end well. She didn't know how right she was. The bailiff started moving toward the entrance, sensing that the exchange had crossed into dangerous territory. Officer, he called cautiously, let's bring everyone inside. Brooks ignored him. His attention never left Maya. He stepped so close that barely a foot separated them. You think you're better than me? I didn't say that. You don't have to. His voice rose loud enough for the courtroom to hear. I can see it. Every conversation stopped. The air itself seemed heavier. Maya took one slow breath, exactly as she had done through countless military training exercises. Control your breathing. Control your thoughts. Control your actions. She had repeated those principles thousands of times. She intended to follow them now. But discipline is not a shield against another person's choices. Sometimes the next move belongs entirely to someone else. Officer Daniel Brooks clenched his jaw, lifted his right hand, and made a decision that would change both of their lives before the next heartbeat had passed. There is an old saying among Marines: the fight you avoid is always the one you win. Captain Maya Carter had lived by that principle for 16 years. She had endured exhaustion that pushed the human body beyond its limits. She had completed combat drills under relentless pressure. She had learned that true discipline meant controlling yourself long before trying to control any situation around you. That discipline was about to be tested in a courtroom instead of on a battlefield. Officer Daniel Brooks' hand sliced through the air before anyone could stop him. The crack of the slap echoed against marble walls and polished wood. Gasps filled the room. Maya's head turned with the impact. A faint red mark appeared across her cheek. She did not cry out. She did not stumble. She simply inhaled. Slowly, deeply. Imagine spending years mastering every instinct your body possesses. Every muscle is trained to react instantly, yet your greatest achievement is learning when not to move. In that single second, Maya wasn't deciding whether she could fight back. She was deciding whether she still had another choice. Brooks stepped even closer. His breathing was heavy. His eyes burned with anger that had long since replaced reason. "You should have listened," he snapped loudly. The courtroom remained frozen. Judge Whitmore pushed back his chair. "Officer Brooks." The command came too late. Brooks reached forward again. Whether he intended to shove her, grab her shoulder, or strike her a second time would later become the subject of endless debate. Only one fact would remain undisputed. He initiated another act of physical aggression. The distance between them disappeared. Years of Marine training compressed into less than a heartbeat. Maya never clenched her jaw. She never shouted. She never even frowned. Her body simply responded. Left foot. Pivot. Weight transfer. Right shoulder. One straight punch. Nothing more. There were no wild swings. No uncontrolled rage. No pursuit after contact. The movement was efficient, precise, and over almost before anyone realized it had begun. The sound of impact was sharp but clean. Officer Brooks' eyes widened. His balance vanished instantly. His body rocked backward as though the floor itself had shifted beneath him. Then he fell. The courtroom watched in complete silence as a man who had moments earlier towered over everyone now crashed onto the polished marble floor. No one moved. Not Maya. Not the deputies. Not even the spectators. Years later, security experts reviewing the footage would describe the motion with the same conclusion. It had not looked like an attack. It looked like a conditioned defensive response performed under extreme pressure. Maya lowered her hands immediately. They rested open at her sides. Her breathing slowed once again. The confrontation, in her mind, had already ended. She took one careful step backward instead of forward. Every Marine is taught that once the immediate threat stops, unnecessary force has no place. She followed that lesson exactly. Around her, confusion exploded. Court officers rushed toward Brooks. Attorneys shouted conflicting instructions. Someone called for medical assistance. Someone else yelled to secure the courtroom. But through the growing noise, Maya remained perfectly still. She neither celebrated nor apologized. She simply waited. Because she understood something almost no one else in that courtroom realized. The truth of what had happened no longer belonged to opinions. It belonged to evidence. Every ceiling camera had recorded the encounter. Every security angle had captured the slap, the attempted second strike, the single defensive punch. Within minutes, those recordings would begin telling a story far different from the one Officer Daniel Brooks had believed he controlled. And once that story reached the investigators already waiting beyond the courtroom doors, the trial everyone thought they had come to witness would become something entirely different. Truth has a strange habit. It often waits quietly while pride speaks first. Then, when everyone believes the story is already written, truth enters the room without raising its voice. The courtroom remained sealed as deputies escorted spectators back into their seats. No one was allowed to leave. Judge Harold Whitmore ordered the doors secured until every witness had been identified and every initial statement recorded. Officer Daniel Brooks was sitting against the front row bench, an ice pack pressed against his jaw, while a paramedic examined him. He was conscious, embarrassed, furious. This woman assaulted a police officer, he said through clenched teeth. She needs to be arrested. His words echoed across the courtroom. For a brief moment, no one answered. Not because they agreed, because everyone had seen something different. Imagine being absolutely certain you control the narrative, only to realize dozens of people have witnessed the same event from another perspective. Power can shape a moment, but evidence has a way of reshaping history. Captain Maya Carter remained standing exactly where the deputies had instructed her. Hands visible, expression calm. She neither defended herself nor accused Brooks. She simply waited. A senior deputy marshal approached Judge Whitmore, carrying a small tablet connected to the courthouse security network. "Your Honor," he said quietly. The hallway cameras captured the entire encounter. The judge nodded once. "Display it." The large courtroom monitor flickered to life. Every conversation stopped. The recording began without sound. The first camera showed Brooks blocking Maya's path. A second angle revealed him stepping closer despite repeated instructions from the bench. A third camera captured the slap with complete clarity. Several spectators lowered their eyes. Even those who had not fully understood what happened now saw it unmistakably. Then came the next sequence. Brooks reached toward Maya again. His body leaned forward. His arm extended. Less than a second later, Maya pivoted. One controlled strike. One immediate. Retreat. No follow-up. No unnecessary force. The video ended. Silence filled the courtroom once again. Judge Whitmore slowly removed his reading glasses. "Replay the final 10 seconds. The deputy did exactly that. Then again, frame by frame. Each replay told the same story. Brooks initiated the physical contact. Brooks closed the distance again after the first assault. Maya responded once. Only once. The paramedic quietly looked toward another deputy. "That doesn't look like an offensive attack." "No," the deputy answered under his breath. "It looks defensive." Brooks shook his head. "That's not what happened." No one argued with him. No one needed to. The cameras had already answered. Just then, another courtroom door opened. A woman wearing a dark federal investigative jacket entered carrying a sealed evidence case. She walked directly toward the prosecutor without hesitation. "We've received authorization," she said. "The witness's file has been cleared for review." Several attorneys exchanged puzzled looks. Witness file? What witness required federal authorization? The prosecutor accepted the folder and opened it carefully. Inside were official military records, commendations, deployment histories, instructor certifications, and a government identification card marked with multiple security endorsements. His expression changed almost instantly. He looked toward Maya, then toward Judge Whitmore. Finally, toward Officer Brooks. The confidence Brooks had clung to all morning began slipping away. For the first time since the confrontation, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. He had assumed he knew exactly who he was dealing with. The file resting on the prosecutor's desk proved otherwise. Because Captain Maya Carter had never come to that courthouse as an ordinary witness. And within the next few minutes, everyone inside that courtroom would discover that the quiet woman Brooks had tried to intimidate possessed a record of service, discipline, and credibility that would make every accusation against her far more difficult to believe than the truth already captured on camera. Reputation can open doors. Character determines what happens after you walk through them. As the prosecutor turned each page inside Captain Maya Carter's file, the atmosphere inside the courtroom changed in ways no one could ignore. The room had been filled with tension only moments earlier. Now it was filled with realization. The prosecutor carefully removed a government credential and handed it to Judge Harold Whitmore. The judge examined it in silence. Then another document. Then another. Deployment records. Leadership evaluations. Instructor certifications. Letters of commendation signed by senior military officials. There was no dramatic announcement. No theatrical reveal. Only quiet evidence describing a life built on discipline, sacrifice, and service. Imagine spending years earning respect from people who measure character by actions instead of appearances, only to have strangers assume they know who you are within seconds of meeting you. Sometimes the loudest judgment comes from those who know the least. Judge Whitmore slowly looked toward Maya. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice noticeably softer. "These records indicate you have served as a Marine combat instructor." "Yes, Your Honor." "They also indicate extensive defensive tactics training." "Yes, sir." "And multiple commendations for restraint under pressure." Maya answered exactly as she had answered every previous question. Yes, Your Honor. Nothing more. Nothing less. Officer Brooks listened from across the room. His confidence continued fading. He had expected excuses. Instead, he was hearing credentials. The prosecutor closed the file. For the record, he said, addressing the court, Captain Carter was scheduled to testify today regarding an ongoing investigation into allegations of misconduct involving members of this department. The sentence landed harder than the punch had. Several deputies looked at one another. An attorney quietly stopped taking notes. Even the paramedic glanced toward Brooks with a different expression. The courtroom suddenly understood that Maya had not appeared by accident. She had been an important witness long before the confrontation began. Brooks leaned forward. That's irrelevant. No, the prosecutor replied evenly. It explains why she was here. Brooks opened his mouth again before stopping himself. For the first time that morning, he had no immediate answer. Judge Whitmore turned toward the senior deputy marshal. I want every security recording preserved. They already have been, Your Honor. I also want the hallway body camera footage collected. It's being downloaded now. Every instruction seemed to narrow the path ahead. Not for Maya. For Brooks. The certainty that had surrounded him all morning was disappearing piece by piece. He looked around the courtroom, searching for support. Most avoided his eyes. Some weren't angry. They were disappointed. There is a difference. Anger fades. Disappointment lingers. Maya remained exactly where she had been instructed to stand. Her cheek still carried the faint mark left by the slap. She made no attempt to hide it. She also made no effort to emphasize it. Facts did not need assistance. Outside, rain finally began tapping against the courthouse windows. The soft rhythm echoed through the unusually quiet courtroom. Judge Whitmore rested both hands on the bench before speaking once more. Based on the evidence reviewed so far, he said carefully, this court will suspend all further proceedings related to today's original hearing. A pause followed. Then came the sentence that changed the direction of the entire day. From this moment forward, our immediate concern is determining whether Officer Daniel Brooks abused the authority entrusted to him inside this courtroom. In a single statement, the roles had reversed. The witness was no longer defending her actions. The officer who believed he controlled the room had become the subject of its most important questions. Justice rarely announces its arrival. More often, it walks quietly into the room after everyone has finished shouting. The rain had stopped by the time Captain Maya Carter stepped through the courthouse doors. The gray clouds that had covered the city all afternoon were beginning to break apart, allowing narrow beams of sunlight to reflect across the wet stone steps. Behind her, the courthouse remained busy. Investigators continued collecting evidence. Deputies interviewed witnesses. Attorneys reorganized schedules after the unexpected suspension of the hearing. Inside those walls, the process of accountability had only begun. Outside, Maya simply paused for a moment and looked toward the quiet street. Imagine carrying years of discipline into a moment that could have been defined by anger. Imagine knowing that people will remember 1 second of your life without ever seeing the thousands of hours that prepared you to survive it with dignity. A young Marine in dress uniform approached cautiously from the sidewalk. He had been waiting outside after hearing rumors of what had happened. Captain Carter? She turned and offered a polite smile. Yes. I just wanted to say. He hesitated, searching for the right words. Thank you. Maya looked at him with quiet curiosity. For what? For showing that discipline doesn't mean weakness. She smiled gently. It never has. The young Marine nodded before walking away, carrying those words with him. Across the street, several reporters had begun gathering near the courthouse entrance. News of the confrontation was already spreading. Camera crews adjusted their equipment. Microphones were raised. Questions were prepared long before answers existed. When Maya emerged, dozens of voices called out at once. Captain Carter, did you intentionally strike the officer? Do you have a statement? Were you acting in self-defense? She stopped only once. Not to defend herself. Not to criticize Officer Daniel Brooks. Not to celebrate what had happened. She simply answered with the same calmness that had guided her throughout the day. I have complete faith that the evidence will speak more clearly than I ever could. Nothing more. She thanked the reporters for their professionalism and continued walking toward her truck. No dramatic speech. No victory pose. No anger. Only quiet confidence. Back inside the courthouse, Officer Daniel Brooks sat alone in a conference room awaiting investigators. For the first time in many years, there was no badge giving him authority over the conversation. Only questions. The same kind of questions countless citizens had once answered while standing before him. Outside life continued. Cars passed through rain-soaked streets. People hurried home from work. Most would never know every detail of what had happened that day. But those who had witnessed it would remember something far greater than a single punch. They would remember a woman who refused to surrender her dignity. They would remember a courtroom where evidence proved stronger than assumptions. They would remember that authority is not measured by the power to intimidate, but by the responsibility to protect. As Maya drove away, the courthouse disappeared in her rearview mirror. She never looked back. She didn't need to, because the real victory had never been knocking a man to the floor. The real victory was walking away with her integrity untouched. Officer Daniel Brooks believed a badge gave him the right to command respect. Captain Maya Carter understood something far more enduring. Respect cannot be demanded. It cannot be forced. It cannot be taken from another human being. It is earned through character, restraint, and the courage to choose dignity when the world expects hatred. And on that quiet afternoon, inside a courtroom built to pursue justice, everyone finally learned the difference.